with Sandra Bullock. Well, if you don't remember the movie, it was a movie in which an FBI agent, a female FBI agent, not particularly known, they did manage to make her look kind of dowdy at the beginning, not known for her class or beauty, is asked to go undercover at a major beauty pageant. Appears there's a possible threat to the other contestants. So she's cleaned up and she's dressed up and she finds herself on stage with the other 49 contestants. And it is time for the question and answer portion of the competition. And contestant after contestant after contestant come in and they are asked the question, what is the most important thing our society needs? And contestant after contestant after contestant give exactly the same answer. What the world needs most is world peace. World peace. So along comes this agent, played by Sandra Bullock, and the announcer Stan asks the question, what is the one most important thing that society needs? And the agent, whose name in the movie is Gracie Hart, responds without a pause. That would be harsher punishment for parole violators, Stan. The crowd, which has cheered every other answer that has been given, is absolutely dead silent. So Gracie adds an addendum. End world peace, to which the crowd cheers. Thank you, Gracie Lou, right? Well, today, since the lectionary has been taking us down some torturous paths lately, I was hoping that I could talk about something that everybody likes. You know, peace and love, right? Peace and love. Instead, we get this passage out of Matthew. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one. Butter, right? For you do not regard people with partiality. So tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why are you putting me to the test? You hypocrites, show me the coin used for the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he said to them, Whose head is on this, and whose title? And they said, The emperor's. And so he said to them, Go give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God. And when they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Interesting passage. Not love and peace. In fact, it was a passage that was set in a time of political division in Palestine that is every much as intense as the political division we have now in our country. There were Roman lovers and Roman haters. There were radical nationalists, and there were those who were collaborating with everybody in order to keep Israel safe and alive. So there were those who would live side by side with the Romans and other countries and just think this is the way of the world now. And then there were those who would drive all the aliens from the land and restore Israel to its natural purity in terms of its ethnicity and its religion. Sound familiar? There's some parallels there, aren't there? It's really interesting. So we have a country where the people seeking power are on two poles. We have the anti-Romans and the pro-Romans. And these people are playing all kinds of games. And in between are all the normal people, right, trying to survive and having a hard time of it. They're really struggling. This is a difficult time in Palestine, and the average person's life was marked by poverty. And then in the middle of all that, in the middle of all this mess, the two ideological poles, the people in the middle, is Jesus. But Jesus is considered a threat by both ends of the spectrum. This is what's interesting about this, right? He's been gaining a lot of attention. All those people in the middle who are struggling so much, they kind of like this guy. This is pretty exciting stuff that he's saying to them. His way of grace and his way of love is exciting. But on the Pharisee end of the spectrum, the pro-Israel, radical Israel group, which is all about law and wrath, they're not very happy with Jesus because they're all about law and he's all about grace. And it's a problem. He's saying things they're not very comfortable with, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you have these Herodians, who are afraid that this guy is going to mess up the status quo and create chaos and weakness in the nation. So neither group like him. Particularly, neither group likes the fact that he won't line up with them. And he won't endorse their end of the spectrum. So in this passage, both sides come here in this one passage together to try to trap and destroy this upstart teacher. And thus the question, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now, one commentary says that the tax in this text was an additional tax known as the imperial tax, that it was a tribute that was sent straight to Rome in order to support the Roman Empire's occupation of Israel. Now, think about that for a moment. You're being asked to pay a tax to your oppressors to support their oppression of you. Does that sound fun? So it wasn't a very popular tax with a lot of people. It was kind of a popular tax, however, with the Herodians, which is one of the groups that came here. They liked it because they were a family party. They were related to Herod, King Herod, who was the puppet ruler who had been put in place by the Romans. So this tax essentially supported the military presence and the structure that kept Herod in power. So they were kind of okay with this tax because it really benefited them. On the other hand, the Pharisees, who were scholars but also a political party, those sitting on the other end of the spectrum, didn't like anything that had anything to do with Rome. This was supposed to be God's land. This wasn't supposed to be Caesar's land. This was supposed to be God's land. And this all was further complicated by the fact that Caesar, at the time, was an emperor who would be God. They wanted people to see them as God, these Caesars. And they put their image on their coins. And the images, of course, in Israel at that time were considered an icon or an idol. So you had this coin which had the image of somebody who wanted to be God. So they considered that idolatry. They considered that coin kind of evil in and of itself. So the payment of this tax for them not only was payment to their oppressors, but it edged into this whole religious realm of idolatry. Now that was a pretty extreme interpretation, but these were pretty extreme guys. So the tax was bad, but had then this horrible transgression of idolatry added to it. So both parties had their own unique perspective about this. And when they came to Jesus with their question, they really believed, both of them, that the question from their perspective was a lose for Jesus. For him, this was a lose-lose situation. If Jesus answered one way, if he said, well, yeah, you got to pay the tax, he would horribly disappoint all of the common people who were now flocking to him and following him, right? His base, his core. If he answered the other way, if he advocated not paying the tax, then the Herodians would point this out to the Romans and basically say, see, this guy is a rebel. This guy is a problem. You need to take him out. And he would probably be at some point, as he was actually, arrested and executed. So they thought they had him. Both groups thought they had him. He would either be a traitor to Rome, terrible consequences, or he would be a traitor to Israel. Not good choices. So what does he do? Well, he answers with this enigmatic statement. Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and give to God the things that are God's. Now what the heck does that mean? Reading those words, I kept hearing Bob Dylan's songs, You Gotta Serve Somebody. Anybody remember that song? Okay, Gotta Serve Somebody. This song it was actually a gospel song. This was on the first album that Dylan put together after he became a Christian and decided Jesus was kind of the real thing. And so he writes this song called You Gotta Serve Somebody. The words go like this: You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble, you may like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. You're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. You're going to have to serve somebody. And I think that's what Jesus was saying here, wasn't it? In his answer to the Pharisees and the Herodians, you have to choose who and what you're going to worship. And once you've chosen, then you can't play games. You cannot mix your allegiances up. You can't mix your allegiance to Rome or even Israel or money or religion up with your allegiance to Yahweh. You can't mix them up. You can't play that game. God is God. God's way is God's way. Politics is politics. Money is money. Religion, sadly, is religion. And when you try to stir them around, and when you try to mix your faith in and blend your faith in to politics and or economics and or even religion, then you end up making your faith at some level, to some degree, subservient to those things. You dilute your faith. And you start down a path that's not very healthy. Because you have failed to do the one thing that Jesus said you needed to do, right? Which is give to God that which is God's. What's God's? Everything. Right? What's God in terms of you? All of you. Right? So everything is underneath that primary allegiance. So, if you don't go to that place, if you don't stick to that place, then you will pay taxes or not pay taxes for a reason other than God. But it must always be God. God first. Everything must be given to God because everything is God. So if you start with that total commitment of heart, soul, mind, and strength, if you think about the Torah, if you make that commitment of heart, soul, mind, and strength to God, then everything else is placed into subservience to that. And then it begins to work. I'm reminded of Luther's famous quote. How many of you have heard this quote? Love God and sin boldly. Anybody heard that one before? Okay, well, it's actually the wrong quote. It's not a real quote. The real quote goes like this. It's actually better. The real quote's actually better. If you are a preacher of mercy, do not preach an imaginary but a true mercy. In other words, don't talk about God's mercy and then think you don't need it. Right? If mercy is true, then you must bear the true, not an imaginary sin. So, if mercy is true, then you have to admit and accept the fact that you need that mercy, right? I mean, this makes sense. God does not save those who are only imaginary sinners. I love that. Be a sinner. This is the part that gets quoted. Be a sinner and let your sins be strong. Love God and sin boldly. But here's the rest of the sentence. But let your trust in Christ be stronger. Isn't that a great line? And rejoice in Christ who is victor over sin, death, and the world. So what Jesus is kind of saying, I think, is along the lines of what Luther was kind of saying. Let your trust in God be strong. In fact, let your trust in God be stronger than any other consideration, and things will fall into place. So he's saying, essentially, don't dilute your commitment to Christ with a commitment to anything else. Now, how many think that sounds pretty radical? Here's how radical it gets. Think about what Jesus said, right? How many of you remember this? The rich young ruler coming to Jesus and saying, what must I do? What must I do? What must I do? Right? And what Jesus said was, what you must do is sell all that you have. Give it to the poor. And then follow me. That's pretty radical, right? Anybody here ready to do that? I'm not. Not really. Okay, what about his comment to the crowds when they're following him and they're following him and they're bugging him and they're pestering him, and he turns to them and he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Wow, I mean, that's pretty strong, right? And in fact, there's a time when his mother and his brothers come to see him, and he says that same thing. You have to hate your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, or you can't be my disciple. Now, if I were his brother or sister or mom, that would hurt, right? But he's talking here about this radical commitment. Now, what's the point of this, right? That we should hate our families? Of course not. What he's talking about is what I call focused attention, or what I perhaps would call fusion. So what he's saying is we have to focus on the sacred. We have to keep our minds, if we go back to the passages we've just been in, we have to keep our mind on heavenly things. We have to have that singleness of focus and the connection created by that focus. And then that will allow us to survive and to navigate in this world of conflicting values, conflicting priorities, and conflicting choices. Because what we do if we fuse with God is we at the same time unfuse or defuse from the other things. We unfuse from our other agendas and our other priorities, and we defuse from our love of power, and we defuse from our love of money. What does it mean, by the way, to fuse with something? When you fuse something, you grab hold of it. And then you put all your energy into hanging on to it. And then you put all your energy into living your life around that thing, right? All your energy goes into money. All your energy goes into power. All your energy goes into whatever. But if you let go, then those things which are so important that we put all of our energy into, that control us and drive us and shape us and affect our choices, those, if we let go of those things, then they no longer can do that. Right? So what Jesus is saying is fuse with God and defuse from everything else. Paul puts it this way in Romans 12, which you heard earlier. Do not be conformed by the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, and by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Do not be conformed by the world, which is what happens when you fuse with it, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, which is what happens when you fuse with God, so to speak. Sorry, I'm using psychology stuff here. I apologize, but that's my world. So think about it, right? Being fused to God and not money will change how we relate to money, right? Being fused to God and not fused to the politics of fear will change how we deal with our fears. And will change how we deal with strangers in our midst and people who are different from us. Being fused to God and not to the shallow mandates of society will change how we deal with the poor and with the addicted and with the elderly and with the ill. Being fused with God will free us from ourselves as well, right? It will change our relationship to our ego and our need to put ourselves first. We will still have a political ideology. We can't help ourselves. We might still have an investment counselor. Some of us will still spend too much time on Facebook. We will still struggle, at least at times, in our relationships. We will still have our fears. But if we can keep ourselves from being fused to any of those things, they will be there, but they will not be in control. Because of our radical fusion and attachment to God. Which is why Jesus says, quite simply, give to God what belongs to God. That being you. So to offer you today's bottom line, I'm going to return to and I'm going to close with Paul in Romans 12. So then, my friends, because of God's great mercy to us, I appeal to you. Offer yourselves as a living sacrifice to God, dedicated to his service and pleasing to him. This is the true worship that you should offer. Thanks be to God for this word to us. If you will turn in